All right, here we go. Monique, how are you?
Hello. I'm good, thank you.
This is awesome. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's awesome to have you with me today again. So, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Let's do this, Monique. Since you're not new to the program here, this is not the first time that you're here. Where this is kind of round two. What I'd like to do
Mhm.
this time is right at the beginning here for anybody that did not maybe catch the first episode where you were on here. Which anybody that wants to go back and check it out, it's episode number 28 with Monique, where we spent a good amount of time talking about her book and stuff like that. But we really just kind of ran out of time, and so I'm really excited for glad you're able to come back on and you were able to come back on without too much time passing. And we're able to kind of get back into round two here and go a little bit deeper on some of the issues that we were discussing last time. But if you would, Monique, just maybe take a minute or two and just share with us just a little bit about who you are for anyone who doesn't.
Okay. Hello everybody. I'm Monique De Leon. I bring you greetings from sunny Southern California, born and raised here. Um, I grew up in a big family. I'm the youngest of five kids, and which was a lot of fun actually. And my story and the things that I do. So I'm a worship leader, author, speaker, and a big abstinence advocate. So I talk about this topic from the perspective of someone who is a virgin and who is a little bit older. I am 39 years old and born and raised in SoCal, which is like the mecca of all things sexual. So I talk about this topic from that perspective and being someone who was raised in church as well. So, um, so that's what I do, just trying to bring encouragement to people who are walking this journey of purity, but also giving the why behind the wait and trying to see things from God's perspective and help give an understanding as to why He's asking us to wait until marriage to have sex and what are the benefit and the blessing of doing that. So that's what I do.
That's awesome, and thank you so much again for being here, Monique. And yeah, again, I'm glad we have this opportunity to kind of keep going. Last time you were on, I really enjoyed our time together and our discussion. We talked a lot about your book, "Pursuing Purity Under Pressure: Encouraging Singles and Young Adults on Living Pure in Today's World." And I feel like we dove into a bunch of different issues, but there were still some questions that I had that I wanted to ask you that I didn't get a chance to ask you last time. So yeah, let's kind of pick up a little bit where we left off. Well, actually, before we do that, if you would just, and this might be a little bit of review again for anybody, but just in case for anybody that that's unfamiliar with what we're talking about here, your book, Pursuing Purity Under Pressure. I did just want to say that I really do appreciate the perspective that you've written this book from, and really your heart in this book. And I really like how you don't tiptoe around issues in the book, but you just kind of go for it. You go after some things that have been, for like, as far as the church world is concerned, like some things that we've probably considered difficult conversations, or conversations that we maybe don't want to have, or that a lot of us are not comfortable having, and things like that. But you're just real with it, and you're real with your story, and you share your experience. You share some of the struggles that you've had too. And I just really love the place that this book comes from. So if you would just kind of in your own words, just tell us a little bit about your heart behind this book, Pursuing Purity Under Pressure, and what it is that you are just wanting this book to accomplish out in the world for people.
Okay. So the reason I wrote it actually was because I was encouraged by a few different people. The beginning of last year, I had three different friends who don't even know each other, but in about a 2 week span, all tell me, you should write a book. You should write a book. You should write a book. So I'm like, God, should I write a book?
Maybe I should write a book.
So, maybe I should write a book. And in particular, there was one a friend who actually lives out in New York, and he was saying because my story is not heard, and even though I feel like there are actually quite a few people whom are virgins and or remaining abstinent, it's just something that's not talked about. And And I think people are a little embarrassed. People don't know how to talk about it. And so I wanted to go ahead and bring it to the forefront to bring that encouragement, even a sigh of relief for some people, and even something that people go, oh, I could totally relate. I understand,
Mm, yeah.
type of a thing, because it's just not something that's talked about in society today. And you had said it so well last time. You said that I have a message that the world is against. And that's
Mm.
100% true because
Yeah.
this very over sexualized culture that we are constantly bombarded with, a message of purity or a message of abstinence is something that is completely countercultural. And
Mm.
with the books, my hope was just that, to bring that encouragement, to let people know that you're not alone. If you are remaining abstinent, that there's nothing wrong with you. If you are, it doesn't mean you're ugly or socially awkward or you can't get a date. Like, it doesn't mean any of that. That, living this life is actually what the norm is supposed to be honest. And so that was with the book, just wanting to bring encouragement and really give more of an understanding biblically, because sex was not something that was discussed in the church a lot, which it should have been and it should be, because sex was God's idea and He created it. So if we, I believe, as a church as a whole, talked about it more, that our young people had a place to go to in the church to talk about this topic instead of the world, that their view of it would be more godly instead of worldly.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the hope in bringing this to the forefront and trying to give a little bit of the why behind the weight.
Yeah, and I
So,
love that, and I love that it's, that why is so key. That why is so key because when
mhm.
I was growing up, it was a lot of, like, do this and don't do that. Well, mostly, in
uh,
this conversation, it was
Mostly
don't do
don't.
that. Don't
Uh,
just don't do it. Why? Well, because, and then there was a lot of focus when I was a teenager. There was a lot of focus on, like, the safety of it. Like, when I was in youth group, growing up in those days, there was a lot on this, there was a lot of, like, stuff that was, like, scare you straight kinda thing, like, don't be
uh-huh.
yeah, like, you don't wanna do this because you can get pregnant, you don't wanna do this because of STDs, and then going, like, really far, down that sort of rabbit hole, and, not that there's no place for that, but I don't think that that works for the average person just to, like,
Yeah.
scare the average teenager out of, not having sex or not, engaging this kinda lifestyle. Oh, anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's actually really good you brought that up,
You looked
because
like
I
you had
recently,
you looked like you had a lot to say there.
yeah, well, I recently had a conversation with someone whom he would told me that same thing. He grew up in church and that was the culture he was raised in. Like, don't do this, it's bad. Wait until marriage. And he said that what happened to him was when he got married, because he was like in his late 20s when he got married. He said it almost felt like sex was wrong because he had been
Wow.
told all these years how wrong it was to do it. Okay.
Mhm.
And then when you got to a place where you finally could, it was almost a little bit awkward. It was almost like, not sure what to do. Are you sure it's okay? Type of a thing. And I thought, wow, that was actually really a really great point, because that's what always has been harped on. The same thing when I was growing up. It was like, don't have sex before marriage because God said so. It was bad. Just wait till marriage, and that's it. No more
Yeah.
conversation. Couldn't ask questions. Couldn't ask any detailed questions, which our young people should be able to, about oral sex or just having urges, or like, you couldn't bring any of that stuff up. And so when he told me that, I thought that was very interesting, because he said for him that was his kind of experience. And that's why more and more I have been seeing, there's actually a book that just came out that I actually would like to get, called Married Sex. And it's by two authors, a male and a female. And so they talk about how married sex is supposed to be the best thing in the world because we're doing it God's way. And
Right.
just all the details about sex, they talk about in this book in great detail, and which is really good and healthy. And I think we have kind of unfortunately programmed ourselves in the church world that like it's bad to talk about when
Mm.
it should be a really good thing because God created it and it was for a few purposes. And so diving into what those purposes are is important. And I think we just as a whole as a church tend to stay away from it when it should be talked about more. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I really think that, well, just for example, for me, I definitely had some of those thoughts in my head too. Like you said, you
Mm,
know, having this conversation about how even after marriage, and there's this idea that there's something wrong about it, there's something dirty about it, there's something, and you know,
mm,
I had a little bit of struggle with that in my head too. I never thought that it was wrong, but I did feel like there was just something. I don't know, like if we attach shame to it, if we attach you know, that sort of sense of that it's dirty or it's whatever, like if we attach that to it for kids like growing up to try to get them to not do it, then yeah, I can totally see where that sort of shift wouldn't necessarily so easily take place. Like you've been told all
mhm.
your life, this is wrong, stay away from it, don't even think about it, don't even talk about it, don't do this. And all of a sudden you're
Mm,
married and it's like all of a sudden like, okay, anything goes
okay.
now. And you're like, you're like, okay,
Uh-huh.
you totally set me up for this moment to be successful, like, thank you so much. Um, so yeah, for sure. That's definitely a thing, and I love that you brought that up, even about some of the things like, I feel like I should whisper when I say oral sex, right? Like, I feel like there's like, I shouldn't ta be able to talk about I shouldn't be able to talk about these things, but if we don't allow that open door for conversations, you know, like
Yeah.
I have kids, I have a 10-year-old and he's just starting to become aware of things. He hears things in
Mhm,
conversation, you know, sees things on TV and commercials, like different things and
mm,
you know, and so we're sort of in that stage of life right now where we're addressing issues as they come up, not trying to
yeah.
go like crazy off the handle with things and
Mhm,
you know whatever. But I've told people on this podcast before. I think I probably err more on the side of overexposure than underexposure when it comes to letting my kids like you know have conversations you know with my kids and stuff like that. But I really do. I think that if we hold back too much, we're kidding ourselves to think that you know our kids, young people, teenagers, whatever, that they're not learning this stuff. They're not picking it up from their friends and from you know
mhm,
people at school and from social media and from
yeah.
whatever else. Everything's so accessible, and as you said, we are living in such an over or you know hypersexualized culture and yeah, like for sure, the church doesn't have the luxury to shy away or to cower away from these issues, but we've got to be open
Yeah.
and honest and again, that's why I think it's so powerful to really focus on discussing the why because that leads us into a
Mhm.
conversation about values and what
Yeah.
matters. And so we make decisions to do or not do certain things not just because the Bible tells me so or not just because the pastor tells me so or my shame tells me or whatever, but because there's a principle, there's a value, there's something real behind it. And the more we can understand that, I think the more we'll be setting ourselves and others up to live this out successfully.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, there's a why behind everything, and
Mhm.
so it's you have to, for a majority of people, you got to have an understanding. Because if you don't have an understanding of the why, then a lot of times people rebel. I mean, it's just like kids. You're raising your
Mm.
kids. They want to know why they can't do that. They want to know why they can't eat that right now. Or, you
Yeah,
know what
yeah.
I mean? So it's like you're having to explain to give them an understanding. And then when people have an understanding, that they then can make better choices
Mm,
and learn and understand consequences of things that you do or things that you don't do. But it's on you. Like everything is a decision, everything is your choice. And God's not going to force you to be obedient. God's not going to force you to do things, but He lays everything out for us. And so, laying even this topic out for people, especially young people, is important because, it's like for us, God says, today has been set before you, life or death. Choose life. Like He's telling you what to do, but it's still your choice if you want to or not. And so, it's one of
mm,
those things, though. But if I have a greater understanding that God has my best interest at heart, and if God is asking this of me, because, there's a reason behind it, because I will be better off in the end, and I'm not going to delay the things that he wants to bring to me. And, I'm not going to hinder what he has in store for me. If I make this decision, then okay, then I have an
Yeah.
understanding that, what, I'm going to do that. But if I have no understanding, and I think that's what it is with a lot of young people because they're getting it from the world and they're seeing everything from a worldly perspective and not a godly perspective. And unfortunately, that's, what we see, where there's so many believers and Christians that live together, that have sex and see nothing wrong with it. Even though, God's word, and granted, I do think there are some people that just were never taught and they just don't
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
genuinely. But once you have been taught and once you do know, we're responsible for the knowledge that we have, and God will hold us
Mm.
accountable for the knowledge that we have. And so giving people that understanding also, then letting them go, okay, I see why. I understand why. And I think if, you can present it and show people like this is a great thing, but God's telling you to wait because XYZ, type
Mm.
of a thing, then
Yeah.
I think it'll just as a whole it will help this generation.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Could we go into a little bit of that, into the XYZ, so to speak, like into
Hmm.
so the some of the benefits behind waiting and what this really all about? Like why would God create something, because this is something that came from God. I mean, God made up sexuality. He made us with like he made us this way. So like
Yeah.
why would God create something like this? And then that really is amazing in its context, but to create something so great and something that we have a desire for, and then to say, but it's off limits until you're married. Like what
Hmm.
what is that, Monique?
So a few reasons. I'm not like I won't say it's everything because other people have different perspectives too, but definitely, I mean, obviously, we could look at the from a natural standpoint. Okay, so procreation. I mean, that is a
Mhm,
natural standpoint why sex was created. This is how we exist, that we come into being, with a man and a woman coming together. And, you can, and even with that, like you can just see that is the blessing of a father and a mother together in the home and having both parents there raising the child, versus just one. Now, I grew up in a single parent home, so I understand
mm,
and how much better it would have been having a father to give me that affirmation, having, a strong male influence in my life in a positive way.
mm,
But you
yeah,
have, so I talk about how sex is three parts. It's physical, it's emotional, and it's spiritual. And
mm,
physically, like I said, that's the physical standpoint of it. But also God, in the natural physical sense, is trying to protect us from things because if we can step back and look at it from a broader sense, that if we even just as a whole, a society, waited and did things God's way, we would not see the things that we see. We would not see rape. We would not be seeing abortions. We would not be seeing sexually transmitted diseases. Like it's just from a natural standpoint, like
mhm,
there's so much of the blessing and the benefit of waiting from a physical natural standpoint. Emotionally, God knows that when He created it, the whole point behind it was to bond us together. Okay, that's why
mm,
in Genesis 1, when it says how a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two become one flesh. Because it literally, marriage is a picture of God and us. And so
mhm,
that marriage, because that's what we are known as the bride of Christ. And so marriage is a picture of like heaven on earth, is really what it is. And so when you come into a covenant with another person, that union, it's a perfect union. It's that picture of God with us, that relationship. And so when you are sleeping around with all these people whom you're not married to, it's almost like you're cheating on God. Like, do you know what I mean? Because it's like, no, like this is designed and created for covenant. It's designed and
mm,
created for a
yeah,
union, a bond, because when you have sex, it's so everything. It's physiological, it's biological. There's chemistry that's being released and endorphins in your body, and that's what's bonding you and gluing you to that person. Sex is the glue, so to speak, for two people to come together in that covenant. Because a lot of times what happens is people have sex with someone that
Did we freeze? I think we froze. Give me just a second. Try to figure out what's going on here. Sorry about that, everybody. We got technical difficulties every once in a while. Um, yeah, okay. So it looks like Monique probably just lost her signal there. So we'll just keep going. And that's so funny because I think that happened last time she was on too. Last time she was able to get right back on. So hopefully that happens again. Hopefully it wasn't maybe it was just a device issue, not so much an internet issue. But yeah, if you can't tell, I'm totally stalling right now because I'm trying to see if she's gonna come right back on or if I should, just kinda keep the conversation going. Um, so yeah, I loved where Monique was going there in that part of the discussion where she was, talking about how this design of God, the plan of God for sex to exist in the context of marriage because God loves the idea of family. And it really just seems like more and more and more in culture and society that we're having a um that the the structure of family and family values and all of that, it just seems to be degrading more and more and more. And I know that it's an intentional thing that the enemy is behind and all of that, but as the people of God, it becomes so important that we defend what the design of God and what God has created and designed us for and what he's designed for us. And it's so funny because when you look at all the shows on TV and the movies and like just like the stuff that you hear, it really seems like the opposite. Like everybody would point to the opposite, that once you get married, that marriage is where sex goes to die, so to speak. That like once you get married, that's it. You're with one partner for the rest of your life. How are you going to do that? How are you going to survive? And that's like a death sentence. It's like the worst thing. And it's just so not true. But our perspective has been so warped to think that, that the best sex and sexual relationships and encounter comes from, multiple partners and getting experience from all these different places and stuff like that. Where if we would follow the design of God for the way that he designed it to be, that there would be that the experience is so much better than we could possibly than we realize, that so much better than we realize, and free from shame and all that kind of stuff. I think Monique is back, so I can stop stalling. Let's see. That- I I was just stalling.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I kind of kept it going a little bit, but yeah, do you remember where you were, or do you need me to remind you?
I don't know where I lost you guys.
Okay, so
What
I'm
was the
not good
last
at
thing
this.
you heard?
My memory's not super bad. Did you end up switching devices, or are you still on the same
No,
one? Do you know what happened?
I'm still on the phone.
Do you know what
No,
happened?
I think my internet went out for a moment. I'm
Okay.
not sure.
All right. Well, you're
Yeah.
back. That's all that matters. So that's cool. Glad you were able to get back on here. Well, you were again, my memory's not good. When you were talking about the
The why
not
behind the wait.
we were talking about that. I'm trying to think of like more specifically where we were in the conversation. Like you
Okay.
were talking about the the overall question was the benefit of waiting till you're married to have
Mhm.
sex, and you were talking about the structure of family a little bit, like getting into that, and God's design
Mhm.
from Genesis chapter 1, that a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and how um, I think the last thing I remember you saying, and maybe it was a little bit further than this, but I remember you saying that our that marriage is actually representative of our relationship with God. And so when we're just running around having all these different sexual partners, it's kind of like we're cheating on God, so to speak.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so if you wanna
it
pick
is.
up from
Yeah.
there?
So, yes, because, sex is so powerful, and I think people forget that, and we're not actually ever really taught that when you engage with sex with someone, like, you have the power to create another person. And that's
Hmm,
why, really abortion could be eliminated if people just waited until marriage, because the number one reason why women have abortion is inconvenience. I mean, that's really the reason why.
wow.
And so it's like, if you keep having sex with people you really don't want children with and you don't want a lifetime with, then why are you having sex with them? Like, do you know what I mean? It's one of those things where,
Yeah.
it's so powerful that you can create another person. And
Mm,
and that's something that God doesn't take lightly, because we can read in Psalms 139, the description of his creation of us in the womb. And so, it's powerful, and it's so binding that, there's so many, even like when I was in high school, of girls that had sex with different guys and then they got dumped because that's all they wanted was sex from them. Like, emotionally, these girls were a wreck, and
mhm.
just emotionally attached to someone and to people whom, and that's where the term like soul ties comes in, because that's
Right,
literally what it does. Because when you have sex, how chemicals in your body are released, and it gives you such a sense of a bond with this individual, even though you don't know them very well and you're not even fully committed to them. You just thought they were really cute, so you decided to have sex with them. But
right,
yet,
yeah,
it gives you this real false sense of connection when it's not, because sex is so
mm,
binding. That's literally what it does. It's the glue for a marriage, for a husband and a wife, and also when you have sex with people, I think people forget that there is excuse me, such a transference that takes place, even spiritually. That's why, people that you lay
yeah,
with, whatever they're dealing with, that's going to get on you. Whatever evil spirits, whatever things that's going on in their life, that's going to jump on and attach itself to you as well. And so it's on all levels, because there's no way for two people to be more intimately connected than sex, because you're engaging in it on the physical aspect. There's literally a transference of
hmm,
your own soul that takes place. And then spiritually, because you're actually fulfilling a command that God gave. And so it's so intimate, and it's actually really deep, but it's been taught that it's so flippant though. Like, have as
yeah,
much as you want with whomever, whenever, none of this sexual oppression they talk about and your sexual right. And I was just, really sad to see how, I have a friend that her daughter is head of like education in a different state, and you're talking about, sex education and stuff, and how, it's not just a matter of kids having, sex at a younger age. It's
mhm,
also kids having multiple sex partners.
right,
So it's like, 14-year-olds have like five and six sexual partners. Like, it's just, and it's really sad because there's no understanding behind it, and that's why pornography is so damaging as well. And watching pornography, and this is where we get into human trafficking. Like, it's something that is
hmm,
so powerful and can be so addictive for people, because that's why even they talk about, with which has been proven and shown, that pornography changes your brain chemistry,
yeah,
and because the way it's presented, it's this beautiful thing that's been perverted. And so, these are just some of the things that, and reasons why God is saying to wait, because so much would be avoided in the
hmm,
world as a whole if we saw it from his perspective, and protecting, because I'm glad that I personally can say there is not a man out there that can go, "Oh, Monique, I already had some of that." Like, there's no one. There's no one that can say that about me. And there's no one that I am so emotionally tied to, or no one that I feel like, gosh, what a waste. Because I think about that. Like, if I would have had sex with, men I've dated in the past, I would think, like, what a waste. You know what I
mm,
mean? Like, why
yeah,
waste all of myself on this man who's not even around anymore? So it's, you know what I mean? Like, there's just
yeah,
a lot of benefits to waiting. And, but while the waiting, I think it's good to talk about it. And this is where I think
yeah,
married couples definitely should come in and
yeah.
talk about. the benefit and the blessing and the union in married sex. How great, which studies show that anyways, that people who are married actually have better sex than people who aren't married. So because of the commitment, because of the bonding that's happened
Wow.
within marriage.
Wow. Wow.
So,
Yeah, man, what you just said was so powerful, and you know, it's like as you're talking, here's what I'm thinking about. It's like marriage as as the precursor to to sexual relations, right?
mhm,
Like without that, so stepping outside of that, and that's stepping outside of God's design. Without that, like without marriage as the, this committed, loving, monogamous, marriage relationship where you've made covenant together, like that as the foundation, or that as the precursor to, we're gonna come together, we're gonna physically, we're gonna have sex. When you remove that, when you remove the covenant aspect of it, when you remove that as the precursor, then all you have this thing that's designed for a specific purpose. And it's like essentially, as you said, when a man and woman, when they come together and they're married, it's two becoming one. And then sex is essentially it's more than this, but it is a physical sort of representation or playing out of that two becoming one. Because
mhm,
because when you um when two people do have sex, there is that idea of two becoming one, that we're becoming one even in this moment. So if I'm becoming one with people that I'm not one with, like if I'm becoming one
mhm,
with somebody who I'm not actually one with, spiritually, I haven't covenanted with this person, then all I'm doing is I'm using this person essentially for, physical gratification,
yeah,
and because it's just something that we want. And I'm not saying using in terms of, like abusive, but it, in a sense, like we're using each other to get something, to gratify one another, and it's consensual or whatever, but we're using each other to get stimulated to that point, because it's something that's there, there's a desire for it. But we're doing it outside of the context that it was designed for, which was covenant. And so all we're doing essentially is I think so often I think that the world has, like, tried to condition us mentally, emotionally, psychologically, whatever, to accept sex as, like you're saying, something that's flippant, something as less than what it is, as less powerful, less meaningful than it really is. And so we've essentially tricked ourselves into thinking that, yeah, we could just do this with whoever we want, whenever we want. We can have multiple partners. We can do this with, who, whatever. Like it's
mhm,
just up to us. And it's free love, it's expression, it's all of that. And it's not this thing that the Bible says that it is, that's actually more weighty and valuable than that. So I can just give this away to whoever, and it doesn't change me, it doesn't affect me. And I think that that's just a lie that we've bought into as a culture, as a society.
mhm,
And but I think that people, for the most part, um, I do think there's a sense. I don't know what you think about this. I know you've had a lot of conversations with people, um, but like where we've gone down, maybe someone who's gone down a road for a period of time with sexual partners or whatever it is, and thinking that they can just give it away as something that's, not a big deal. We've seen all those movies, right, about, having, like, the friends with benefits, and it
mhm,
always goes bad, right? Like
mhm.
there's always the conversation, "No, this can be completely unemotional, and this could just be physical," and it never works out that way, right? Like, have you seen that play
No,
out with people that people that you've had conversation with, where, like, maybe they thought that it could just be this physical thing and that was it, but then they have to come to grips with the reality that, "No, like, this has actually affected me more than I thought it would."
yeah, yeah. I even had a friend who was very promiscuous, slept with all kinds of girls and stuff. And he said that he actually stopped because he felt like um losing his own soul, for lack of a better term, where it was just
Mm,
like it was just nothing. Like it meant it was to a point where, you know, it no longer even satisfied any longer, because it was
Wow.
just because it didn't mean anything anymore. And when there's actually so much meaning behind it, and people have to, and they forget, and they think that it's just physical. It's not, because that's why, when a woman is raped, why is it worse than if she consented? Because it's emotional. There's emotion
Wow.
attached to it too. That's why. Because she didn't want that done to her. And so there's an emotion attached to it, not just physical. And I think especially with younger people, they don't realize that. And I think they go through all these emotions and feelings that they don't even know and understand what they are. But it's because they're actually
Hmm.
giving themselves away to so many different people, and they don't really know how to handle it because they're too immature. They're too young. You know what I mean? And so it's like,
Yeah.
I think this is a part of the problem that we see in society, is because of that. And there's so much attached to it. And even like another friend I talked about in the book, how he was really promiscuous as well, and he would say that he noticed things after sleeping with women, that he would start drinking more, or
Hmm.
he'd be depressed, or he'd
Yeah.
be more irritable, and he's like, this isn't me, like none of this, but he says it dawned on him one day, it's the women that he's laying with. And that's what I said, the things that people are going through, that transfers onto you. And so that's why, people, I think when that becomes reality and people realize or understand why they're acting the way they're acting or doing the things they're doing, because there's such a transference of so many different people, with you, that it's gonna
Hmm.
affect you. And it's not exactly friends with benefits. Like you said, all those movies, no, someone gets hurt because somebody got attached.
Sure.
Because you do, because it's emotional also. So yeah.
Yeah.
But we don't ever talk about it like that. And I think the other thing with society, what I talk about is, we don't teach people discipline, and we don't teach people to exercise self-control. And
Hmm.
that's actually really dangerous. And so, because all these generations prior before us, like this is what they did. They practiced self-control and they practiced discipline. Like
Wow.
waiting until marriage to have sex was a very normal way of life for every culture, every ethnicity, and every time period. Like that was a very normal thing to do, because they were taught the discipline, practicing self-control. And so this was a very normal thing to do. And if you had sex outside of marriage, that was really taboo. That wasn't normal. So that's why it's like, no, like this was a normal way of life. And everyone, generally looking at it from this perspective, or was better off for it. So yeah, so that's something that I always
Yeah.
like to touch on.
Yeah, and for sure that boundary line just always gets pushed further and further and further, pushing it back further on a grand scale, like as far as society and culture goes, but on an individual scale as well. Like you mentioned your friend who, or I don't remember if you said he was your friend or not, but this person that you were talking about who had said that, after having like many, many, many sexual partners and then getting to the point where he felt like this isn't even satisfying me anymore. I think that that's one of the dangers of things like pornography and stuff like
Hmm.
that, because what happens is you learn how to essentially gratify yourself, or you're essentially learning how to, use somebody else that you're, looking at a screen or, whatever it is that you're
Hmm.
doing, but you're essentially using somebody else so that you can gratify yourself. I think there's something like kind of narcissistic about that to a certain extent, where it's like this person right now is just kind of like, right now in this, like they're existing for my pleasure, sort of a thing.
Yeah, and
But
yeah, that's
yeah,
how, like you're saying with pornography, how so much of pornography happening now is, women that are trafficked. And so therefore it's like people are only seeing them just as objects. And someone loses really their value when all you're seeing them for is something to satisfy you in that
yeah,
moment. And so a
yeah,
person loses their value when that's how you're seeing it as. And that's why, even if you remember the famous basketball player Wilt Chamberlain,
hmm,
whom his claim to fame was like he slept with 20,000
yeah,
women,
yeah,
right? Okay. That was like his claim to fame, right? And I saw and was reading is one of the last interviews he did before he died. And he said people think it's pretty cool to have slept with 10,000 different women. It's like, but I realized that it would have been better to sleep with one woman 10,000 times. And so it was
Wow.
something at the end of his life that he
Wow.
realized none of that was really satisfying.
Hmm.
None of it was really satisfying because it didn't mean anything with any of these women. And that was, he died alone. He was a single man, never got married, never had kids.
Wow.
But I'm pretty sure there's a child out there with all these women he slept with. Just
Sure.
saying. Side note.
There's gotta be.
But it's saying.
Just statistics.
Yeah. But it's just one of those things where that was the reality, and that's what he said.
Yeah.
It would have been better to have one woman 10,000 times than
Yeah.
10,000 different women, and because it became like nothing for him
Right. Wow.
and empty, and so yeah,
Yeah,
so it's
and that's what
something.
happens. That's what happens when when you have a warped attitude about sex and what sex is supposed to be and what it's supposed to be for. I think that that's the natural progression, and so that's
Mhm.
what we see, like, with the pervasiveness of things like pornography, where it's so accessible and you can have it, access to it anytime you want on your phone, like
Mhm.
whatever. You don't have to even wait for the dial up like it was when I was a teenager. You know what I mean? You don't have to wait for the you
Uh,
don't have to wait for that anymore. It's just you could just get it, and kids can get it, and
yeah.
it's just there. And then even if you're not like out to do that, just watching a commercial on TV and you see,
Mhm.
basically soft porn
Yeah.
that might just, pique your interest and curiosity. And there's the chemicals in your brain start moving around and whatever. And, whatever it is, wherever that boundary line starts, I just think it's human nature when we're not submitted to the lordship of Jesus, and we're not, like you talked about boundaries, and you talked about, what was the word that you used? I'm blanking on the word right now. You talked about discipline, right? And
Mm.
so, when we're not when that's not our focus, and we just kind of, go after those things, go after those desires again that are not submitted to the lordship of God, then I think the natural human progression is just to go further and further. Like, okay,
Yeah.
this used to satisfy me, but it doesn't anymore. To the
Yeah.
point that, regular pornography used to satisfy me, but now I need something that's a little bit darker, and then so
Yeah.
you can see how a person's view of sex can get increasingly more unhealthy, and
Yeah.
that's where, things turn to violence, and things turn to like
Yeah.
all these other things, that, and then just setting up improper expectations, so that, I've heard stories about people that when they do get married, and you talked about this a little bit too, I think, that people do get married, now it's like sex isn't what they thought it was going to be, and
Mhm.
then they end up having problems with their spouse because
Yeah.
they're not satisfying them, and they're not whatever, and it's really not their fault. It's because they've had this perception of
Mhm.
what sex is supposed to be built up in their mind because of all these things that have just existed for all this time that they thought was just to gratify me. It creates such a selfishness, I think, and again, just improper expectations. And, like, I'm not saying any of this stuff to condemn anybody who's, whatever. Like, I know what it's like to be. I was young at the time, but I know what it's like to be addicted to pornography.
Mhm.
I get that. So I feel your pain.
Mhm.
Um, but, there's freedom. We can be free from it, and we need to. I mean, it's such a pervasive thing. And anyway, I think I brought that up because I was just we have this idea that we think it's innocent because it doesn't involve another person,
Mhm.
or we think that it's innocent because we're not hurting anybody, whatever. And but I think what we fail to recognize so often is what we're actually doing to ourselves, that we're actually hurting ourselves in the process.
Yeah. And I think
You know?
people also have this even if you remove God out of the picture, um people think being free is being able to do whatever you want, whenever you want, however much, and no boundaries. And I think
Yeah.
people that's such a false thing that has been taught that freedom is doing whatever you want whenever. When even, as I'm saying, even if God doesn't even have to be in the picture, but just the regular layperson, like, no, because if you allowed this flesh and this body to do what it wanted all the time at any time, what a horrible society we'd have and a way to live. That's why
Yeah.
we do have boundaries. That's why
Yeah.
we do have guidelines. That's why discipline and self-control are needed. And so even that's what I'm saying. So in a society where sex is constantly being pushed and even more and more now with this new sex education that they're teaching kids in school, it's so ridiculous where and I stay up on all this and I read up on all this stuff and how they want to even get rid of abstinence as an option
Mm.
for young people.
Wow.
And starting in kindergarten is when they're starting to teach anal sex in kindergarten. And there's
Do you have any
no
idea what the reason, like, or the ideology behind that is? Like, what how that could possibly be justified?
there's none. And what they say is how that it is a young person's sexual right, okay, to know these things. And the pictures they're showing, and it's called comprehensive sex education, CSE. Okay, and this is what it shows. So starting in kindergarten, they're and then they show pictures now. Like, and when I was a kid, it was like kind of like a cartoon graphic type of a thing, but
Right.
now it's actual adult genitalia that they're showing elementary school students. Okay, and
Wow.
so it's so you rob a child of their innocence and you are putting these sexual seeds at such a young age when
Mhm.
like my 6-year-old nephew is not thinking about oral sex or anal sex. Like
Right.
he wants to know what he's having at snack time and when he could play video games. Like, do you know what I mean? And so
Mhm.
when you're putting this
Yeah.
at such a young age, oh, I mean, just the danger of it for the future. And that's the reason why everything is connected, everything's tied to each other, where even just talking about like you're saying, it's not enough any longer, so that's why you go to pornography, but now you want something more violent, and that's when you get child porn, and that's when and so
Mm.
when you
Yeah.
keep pushing, you set no boundaries. That's such a danger. And so sexually, because sex is so powerful, and
Hmm.
that's the thing that we're not teaching, and we're not really explaining to people how powerful this thing is. It's like a dam. Okay, that's why we have dams to keep the water contained. But when a dam breaks, the damage that the water does, like water's so powerful,
Yeah.
but it's contained. It's contained for a reason. And so it's the same thing with sex. It's like a wildfire that will
Mm.
continue to spread if you don't stop it. And so that's why, just bringing it all back full circle, why God is smart. God's so smart. And he, he gave this thing because he knew how much you would enjoy sex. He knew how much you would enjoy pleasing your wife and your wife pleasing the husband. But that's just it. It's for those individuals, the
Yeah.
husband and that wife.
Yeah.
And there's a reason. There's so much. And that's why if outside of that, you can just see the spiraling down of our culture outside of that. And so,
Wow.
um, yeah, just to kind of bring it full circle, that's the why behind the wait, you know?
No, yeah, that was really good. I really appreciate that. As we're kind of winding down on time here, I wanted to just maybe talk about something just a little bit practical. What would you say for let's just say a young couple, maybe young adult couple, um, who they I don't know, maybe they like each other or they're falling in love or whatever the situation is, but as far as like a young couple being in a dating relationship and how just maybe some tips or thoughts on how a young couple, or I guess even this could apply to an older couple as well,
Adults, you know?
that's not married. I don't know what the differences are as far as like age and things like that, but that's why I was kind of going like middle of the road, like maybe a couple in their young 20s or something early 20s, something like that. Anyway, however you want to attack this question, but just a couple who's like they're dating and they want to have a they want to get to know each other, they want to date each other, maybe they're thinking about marriage but they don't know each other well enough yet or whatever the case is, but like how a young couple can date in a way that's healthy, where they can actually get to know each other, where they're not being oppressed by religious ideology and stuff like that. They can actually have freedom in their relationship to get to know each other,
Mhm.
but in a way that's safe, where they're not going to be crossing boundaries and stuff like that. What are some thoughts that you have on the safe way to date today?
Yeah. Definitely got to set up boundaries. Like, just if it's to the point where you're in relationship and you're falling in love, have that conversation, of, okay, we're not going to do this because if you touch me here or when you do, I'm gonna go crazy. Like, I mean, like that's what I'm saying. Like, have
Yeah.
the honest conversations, which I think a lot of times people don't, and I've had to myself. Um, knowing, what sets you off, you know what I mean. So
Mhm.
it's like, you know
Yeah, yeah,
what,
yeah. Yeah.
don't touch me there, don't like, and
Yeah.
so really, and sticking to it, having the guts to stick to it, and but having an honest conversation of setting up boundaries, because what you're doing is you want to protect each other's purity, and that's something like, even, dating someone I'm dating, like, I want to protect not only my own but his as well,
Come on.
and I
Mhm.
want to protect his purity, and I don't want to purposely make him lust after me, because quite honestly, he don't need no help. You don't need no help. Like, he can do it on his own. And so that's
Yeah,
why it's like,
right.
I don't want to purposely do that to you. And so,
Mhm.
because when you see a relationship from God's perspective, that if God is bringing this person in your life and God is trusting you with that individual.
Yeah.
And so, seeing it from that way, that I want to protect your purity as well as my own. And so, setting the boundaries, yes, hang out, spend time together. But, I think a lot of times you do know your own self, and you do know what's too much when it comes to the physicality. And if things start to become too heated, then you just need to pull it back.
Mhm.
You need to, but
Yeah.
have that conversation though, for sure. Because I think a lot of times people don't. You don't have those conversations, but have that conversation with each other.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah, the boundaries.
in your opinion, sorry to interrupt you. In your opinion, as far as like what becomes too heated and how far is too far and what the boundaries have to be, do you think that that's individualized for for each individual person? Is it just kind of being honest with yourself and knowing how far is too far, like where the line is? Like
Hmm.
should the line be drawn at kissing? Should the line be drawn at making out or French kissing, or should the line be like where should that
Hmm.
line be drawn? Do you think that that's sort of an individual thing that we just have to be mature enough to be, um, what do you call it? I just said it a second ago. Where we've just got to be honest with ourselves to the point
Yeah,
that we can have those conversations and have those dialogues and set those boundaries. Like, do you think in other words, do you think it varies from couple to couple, from person to person?
I do. I think that'll vary, because also, as believers, we have the Holy Spirit. So he will let you know, and he will convict you on the inside, if you're listening. And then again, you do know your own self. And so for some people, kissing is too much, and that, for them, that's it. And then you got some people that are like waiting until the altar to kiss. I could tell you that ain't
Right.
me. Let me tell you, that's not me. But for some people, that is, and that's
Yeah.
fine. But it's something that the two of you should be in agreement on. And
Right.
so,
Right.
but if things do get, that's what I'm saying, they're on the inside, you already know, but then also, you've got the Holy Spirit to say, you know what, for you, that's too much. You're not gonna be able to handle that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do think it's different for people, because I've known people that that's what they did. They waited until they were married for their first kiss, and because they said they know themselves,
Hmm.
and they said that that is just going to snowball into other stuff that they don't want to get into until they're married. So that's why, yeah, some people, kissing's fine, touching's fine, and they don't go beyond that. And they are disciplined to where that's it. They don't allow themselves to go beyond that. And so, as I said, I do believe that's something that will vary,
Yeah.
on the individual, because it's also on your personality. Like, that's your personality too. Some people are just naturally much more extroverted, and some are naturally much more reserved. So it's a combination of things that I think it will depend on. But yeah, an individual. So that's
Yeah.
why, having that conversation in a dating relationship, I think, is good. Um, sure, you've agreed upon, we're going to wait until marriage to have sex, but what about the other stuff? So that's where it's
Right.
like, yeah. So having that conversation, setting those boundaries, because all in all, you want it to honor God, while still fully enjoying getting to know each other and having
Mm,
fun and hanging out and spending time together. Um, but protecting each other's purity is what you want to
mm.
do.
That's so good. I love that you said that, and you said that earlier too, and you just brought it back again about protecting each other's purity and honoring those boundaries that you set up, not just for yourself, but for the other person.
Hmm.
I know in when I was dating my wife, like that was something that was so huge for us. And we were dating while we were in Bible college, and that's when we met and we started dating, and I don't know, like, I remember, um, like, she'd come over my house on breaks, I spent time, like, weeks at one point, like, several weeks where I spent, at her house at one point. Her family was her parents lived there and stuff, it wasn't just me and her, we weren't shacking, but, like, you know what I mean? Like, I had to do I had my own room and whatever, but, like, we went on I remember we one time went on a vacation together, with my family, but there were definitely opportunities where, like, you know what I mean? Like, we could have done anything we wanted. Like, there were definite opportunities. Like, we were spending time together, like, alone at times and stuff like that, and I remember, like, I had my Christian friends telling me, like, "You shouldn't you just gotta be careful. You gotta be careful. The enemy's out to get you," and stuff like that, and, like, I get that there's temptation,
Hmm.
and for a while, I was like, "Okay, we gotta be careful," but I realized I was like, "Hold on a second, like, you and I have had really candid conversations about where we're at and our boundaries, and, like, I can tell you, like, I would never like, I'm not gonna go against my value, but let me tell you what I would never do. Like, I would never go against, like, your values, and I would never do something to put you in a position where you're gonna feel like I'm taking advantage of something that you entrusted me with. And so,
Hmm.
like,
Good.
I promise you, Monique, like, it was never even a thought. Like, I'm gonna be honest with you, and, like, I know
Hmm.
this might be, like, a weird thing to say, like, it was never a thought. Like, what if we just had sex right now? Like, it was never like, we spent a
Mm.
lot of time alone, we spent time like, all kinds of places, whatever. Like, it was never even a consideration because of the fact that very early on, we had those discussions about the boundaries.
Hmm.
I knew where she
Hmm.
stood, she knew where I stood, we knew what the limits were. I mean, I'll tell you, there were times where, like, you know, we were, like, kissing or something like that, and I would say, "Hold on, I gotta stop." Like
Uh-huh.
like that, like, I gotta stop, and we'd go for a walk or something, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Because I knew that there was a boundary there, and I was like, "Alright, like, I'm not gonna push past like, I'm at a point, and if I keep going, like, I might, in my mind, I'm gonna things might get out of control or
Yeah.
whatever." But we knew what that was, and so anyway, I just resonate with that so well. I think that that's such a really good advice for anybody, whether you're, like, in a teenage relationship or you're an adult in a relationship or whatever. If you are pursuing walking in purity together, having those conversations where you know where you are, you know where the other person is, and you can set those boundaries. And then what becomes really, really important is to stick to those boundaries. And I think
Hmm.
that that mutual respect and honor for one another, um, will help you walk through that. And to because I mean, anybody can in the heat of the moment just like screw it, like, you know what I mean, and just
Yeah.
forget about your value. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think when you become intentional about honoring and respecting and valuing the other person's desires and decisions, I think that it becomes even easier to sort of walk that thing out and to make sure you're not putting yourself in those precarious positions and stuff like that.
Yeah. Because, and
um,
that's a part of valuing the other person. And I think we don't see people as valuable like we used to. That,
mm,
this individual is in my life. And even if you didn't marry them, but even still, whatever the time being is, it's like placing value on that person. So you're not going to treat them like that or try to get them to do this because you're placing value on that person and
that's good.
knowing their heart and their desire and where they stand. So putting a value on the individual, I don't think we do that enough. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. um, yeah, it's huge, it's so key.
hmm.
What do you think about the mentality that, like, in a dating relationship or whatever, As long as it's not intercourse, it's not sex. Or like as long as it's not, we're not at the finish line,
Mhm.
then, it's okay. Like everything else everything else is okay.
Uh,
I think that that's something that a lot of Christians have done,
yes.
and like sort of like pedestalizing virginity as this thing. Like you can't have that, but like we can do all this other stuff. And
Uh-huh.
so that mentality, what do you
You are
what do you do with that?
setting you're setting yourself up for failure because if you have missed it if you were trying to see how far you can go and it's still not considered a sin. Like that
Mm.
right there is
Yeah, yeah,
giving you an
yeah.
indicator that you shouldn't be doing it then.
Yeah,
Because,
that's good.
it's trying to see how far um because you're really lying to yourself. Because if you have a knowing, like I said, the Holy Spirit, He's there, He's our guide, He's our teacher, and He will convict our heart. And if you're like, but I didn't do this, how far? What if I let him try this? And if you are constantly doing that, it's just a matter of time before you will fall. Because that's like with anybody, and that's like with anything, you know.
Mm.
Whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, like if you just try this or try that, or if you, and
Yeah.
it's just a matter of you constantly trying to get to the edge. You're eventually going to fall off. Like it really, you're setting yourself up for failure. With
For
that
sure.
kind of a mentality. Because how about you like ask God, God, is it okay if I engage in this? Like I mean, see what He says. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things
Yeah,
where,
it's a good
and if
question.
Jesus was in the room and you
Jesus
know
in the room.
you're engaging in oral sex, like see if is he gonna
Excuse me.
be like cool? Like you have to really see these things where as you're exchanging bodily fluid with someone, but it's not intercourse. Like it's
Yeah.
one of those things where you have to really check your own heart because and that's where it's been sold to us and as a society like everything else is fine. But is that purity though? And when it
Yeah.
comes down to it,
Right.
is it
Right.
purity? Because
Right.
God does say, "Be holy, for I am holy."
Mm.
And in order to live a holy life, it takes discipline
Yeah.
and trying to represent Him, and we want to represent Him well. That is my desire is to represent Him well to people. And so, yeah, you're setting yourself up for failure if you have that kind of a mindset. And I encourage anyone who does think like that, really get with God and get in His Word and see what He has to say.
Mm. That's really good.
So,
I like your answer there. Um, it's really good. Well, Monique, I really do appreciate you coming back on, and I appreciate your time. And I would like to just make sure that we let everybody know where they could go to find out more about you. I know we've got moniquedeleon.com. And
mhm,
so, for anybody watching, Monique's name is up on the screen. If you are checking this out on one of the podcast platforms, I'll make sure that the links are in the show notes for you as well. But you can go to moniquedeleon.com. You can check out some of we can check out the online courses that you have there available,
mhm,
Monique, for anybody that wants to go deeper into learning about discovering purity, this personal walk of the pursuit of purity in their own life. We can go to amazon.com and find your book, Pursuing Purity Under
mhm.
Pressure. Where else would you point somebody that maybe just wants to find out about some more resources that you have available, or even to connect with you or your ministry?
Yeah, you can also go to pursuingpurity.info, and that is where all the online courses. So I do online courses, and also I can do like a group coaching, so to speak, on particular
Cool.
topics. So whatever it is that you want to go deeper on, there's 5 different courses, and there's 3 different groups that you can be a part of, where it's deeper teaching. And yeah, and if you purchase an online course, I will send you a book for free, and that way you can have that to go along with the online course. And but yeah, moniquedeleon.com is where you can click the link to connect to pursuingpurity.info. There's videos there you can watch of me doing worship and speaking, and just all the information and contact info, and all the links to my social media are there on moniquedeleon.com. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Love it. Well, Monique, thank you again. Thanks for all the wisdom and just value that you imparted here to the listeners. Really, really appreciate your time. So, yeah, thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks everybody for checking out this episode. Really appreciate you guys as well. If you haven't already subscribed, if you're listening to this on one of the podcast platforms, make sure you subscribe. If you want to share it, that would be amazing. If you want to leave a review, that would just make my whole world, like all my dreams come true. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate you. See you next time.